Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to present my work here. The title of my presentation is called CALPHAD, Calculation of Phase Diagram. My name is Zikui Liu. I'm a professor at Penn State, and I'm also the immediate past president of ASM International. Well, CALPHAD, as it says here, it stands for Calculation of Phase Diagram. When you think about a phase diagram, you usually think it's equilibrium. That's right. So phase diagram is for equilibrium. However, the thermodynamics behind the phase diagram is not only for equilibrium. It's for non-equilibrium, for actually any state of a system. So I just published a paper, an overview paper last month in Active Materialia. So I encourage you to read this paper because this one I discussed the fundamentals of thermodynamics beyond the equilibrium and how computational thermodynamics can be used for a wide range of applications. So let's go back to CALPHAD. CALPHAD, again, it stands for calculation of phase diagrams. So it's a modeling of properties of individual phases in a material and interfaces. So there's a community of CALPHAD. It has a website, calphad.org, and it has a journal called the CALPHAD Journal. The first issue was published in 1975. Now it's published by Elsevier. And it is a private nonprofit foundation. It's for scholarship and awards. It's called CALPHAD Incorporated. And then we have an annual conference. It's Golden Conference style since 1970. So we hope the situation will be okay next year for us to hold this 50th conference in Boston. That's where it started. And there are a number of tools and databases for CALPHAD. So there are some commercial ones. That means you have to pay to use them. But they all have educational versions too. SOMOCAG, PactSage, CompuSum has a product called Pandat, GMAT-Bro, and MetaCAG. And there are also some open source codes too in the recent years. OpenCALPHAD was developed, started a few years ago, and PyCALPHAD and SPay, which are developed by my group, started also like close to 10 years now. So we talk about the importance of CALPHAD because you hear a lot of them when you go to conferences. People talk, oh, CALPHAD, right? What is impact? Well, if you have read this publication called Integrated Computational Materials Engineering, ICME, in 2008, it states in one of the inside of the report, it says CALPHAD software is arguably the most important and perhaps the only generic tool available for ICME practitioners. That's about 10 years ago. I believe it's still today. The reason is because, as we're here for this talk, that it really captures the fundamentals, the building blocks of materials. And you probably also heard about the Materials Genome Initiative, which is a government initiative started in 2011, focused on computation capabilities, data management, and the integrated engineering approach. So ICME is a very, very important part of it. And I would like to bring your attention to two publications. One is by Greg Olson and Charlie Kuhlman, and titled Materials Genomics from CALPHAD to Flight in 2014. And also one of my publications called Perspective on Materials Genome, also in 2014. So it's talk about the Materials Genome or Materials Genome initiative from different aspects. So let's go into more detail about what CALPHAD modeling. As I mentioned before, it models the properties of individual phases. That's very important. It's individual phases because that phases may be metastable or even unstable under some condition, right? So we'll talk about that friendage here. That's very important part is about this function here. As usually you will see that it's a function, friendage function, temperature, pressure, composition. But here we put another variable here. It's talk about the internal degree of freedom. That means it may not be at equilibrium yet. Because if it's at equilibrium, this psi here would become a dependent variable. But now it's independent variable. So in order to do the model of the Gibbs energy, we need the data, right? So I have two sets of data. One is derivatives of the Gibbs energy, which gives us derivative give us the heat capacity, enthalpy, entropy, and activity, or a wide range of properties that we will see in a few slides. And the nice thing about the phase diagram, right? Phase boundary. You talk about the stability of different phases. You talk about the phase boundary. So we have phase stability. So we know the materials are complex, right? We have a lot of elements there, components there. So with the CALPHAD start with pure elements, then you go to binary, ternary, and you build a multi-component databases. So this structure is very important. Because that means that because multi-component is very complex, you have to need many people to work on it. So in that case, in that aspect, you can start with a simple system, then put them together. So different people can work on different systems and put them together. So as soon as you finish that, then you can start the application, use the database, which you can do material design. Material design, you can think about three aspects. Equilibrium, that's like phase diagram. Or you want to know whether phases are stable. Or you talk about driving forces. You want to see what's the driving force for system to change from liquid to solid, from this crystal to another crystal. Or you want to talk about the physical property, chemical property of that phase. So you do the derivatives. Okay. So you can see actually it's not only phase diagram, that's the equilibrium, but the driving force, that's for kinetics, phase transformation, and the physical chemical properties for properties, for applications. Okay. So it's actually CALPHAD, or thermodynamics in general, cover all the spaces. So let's look at a typical case for a material, right? So when you have a material, you will get a materials property data sheet. This data sheet give you chemistry, give you the processing parameter, how it's processed, to give you the properties. So what is missing in today's MPDS is what connects the process to properties. So this 1997 paper by Greg Olson, he highlighted this importance there. His practice too, is you need to put structure in the middle. What are the structures there? We're talking about in material science, it's the phases. You have the matrix phase, we give you the martensite, or you have the strengthening phase, which are the carbides in this case, or you want to talk about control the grain size, make the fine grains, or sometimes you need a larger grain for Cooper properties. Or then to have the metastable phases, austenite, right? So it's metastable, so how to distribute it, talk about stability. But actually, if you enrich it enough, you become stable, right? So this metastable stability is really changing because it will change composition. And they also want to control not only the green side, but they also want to control the green chemistry. Okay, make the green bond strong. So these are all different phases, right? So that means we really talk about the phases, about distributions and interfaces. So from the material design point of view, you want to design your chemistry and processing and get the desired structures, then give you design properties. So if you really want to make a material design, the middle part cannot be omitted. So that's what it goes back to the core materials engineering. So we have a property, we have a structure, we design a performance with a set of properties. Then we look at what structure we do that, microstructure. Then we see how we can make this microstructure and what chemistry we need. So that's what called inverse engineering design. You have what you need, what you want, and then see how you can make it. And if you look at the corresponding science part, we talk about thermodynamics, that is chemistry, processes and kinetics, and the crystallography about structures and the defects determine the properties. So you now see put them together, right? So you now see I put thermodynamics in the core because thermodynamics really affects all of them. Because thermodynamics affects the kinetics, it affects the crystallography. And of course, defects. Defects is part of thermodynamics. That's part of the internal degree of freedom of a system. So when we study material science engineering, what do we study about thermodynamics and kinetics and so forth? So we study thermodynamics is Gibbs energy, as I mentioned before, and the kinetics is about diffusion. Microstructure, we talk about different phases to put it together, and with interfaces. And there's defects. Interface is one type of defects. Put them together, it detects the property, dictates the properties. So now, if we can put an inverse engineering design and a forward scientific simulation together, then you can really grasp the whole picture of material science engineering. Then we can design materials. So you can see that one now. To make this material design, we need to find these building blocks, right? Basically, you can think about it as the Lego. The individual faces of the Lego you have, put them together. Yeah? So that's why I called the name material genome back in 2002 when I needed a name for my company. So I did material genome incorporated in 2002 for my company. Okay, so why material genome then? We talk about this, but it's why genome? We just do it. Why do the microstructure do so? So what does really genome bring us? Okay, let's talk about what genome is. It's information. So it carries some information. Okay, in DNA. So that means now we think about the information carried in by phases. Right? Then we think about the Human Genome Project. That's a very successful project. It's about the DNA. Talk about the sequence. Okay, talk about the chemical pairs. I have a couple more slides to talk about that one. The ratio of genes and the chemical pairs is 10 to the fifth order. They need a tool and data to the analysis. So it's not only data, right? The data and the tool, put them together. And you probably heard the musical genome, which resulted in the Pandora in 2005. Okay, they again to decompose the music and then combine them together to describe a different mood of people, different moods. Okay, now we material genome. You can see this one is like 10 years, right? Well, a little bit over 10 years. This is another 10 years, right? Another 10 years. Okay, so maybe next 10 years we're gonna have. Well, next 10 years we can very interesting, right? Next 10 years, what will be next 10 years? Well, hopefully material genome will produce something which like well, I think if you think about what the next 10 years, it's probably the huge application of the integration of the artificial intelligence, for example. Okay, let's look a little bit more about the Human Genome Project. What is it really about? So it's to identify and map all the genes we have for human being, human genome. That's about 20,000 genes. 20 is not a big number, right? How many people have billion? We have how many? 7 billion people, right? It's only 20,000 genes. Yeah. And however, in the genes, there are a lot of details. Okay, so that's called a base pairs. That's 3 billion. It's 5 orders of magnitude. And what's DNA? DNA is actually a material. It's long polymer. It's kind of 2 chains coil around each other, and the chains are connected by the chemical pairs. Okay? So that means this chemical pair sequence, okay, of these chemical pairs, which dictates the properties. So that's a key one, right? So you see, by the different arrangement of these chemical pairs in these 2 chains, you get different genes. So that's what the genes are about. So now we have 20,000 genes. Genes have different size, large or small. Okay, you can 3 order of magnitude difference of them. And then come together, they form this big structure. Okay, this structure is like a 4 order of magnitude, right? Minimum 4 order of magnitude, or could be even much larger, right? That'd be 7 order of magnitude. So if you try to make the analogy of this one with materials, then we have phases, right? Think about the genes as our phases. Okay, the genes of the phase give the properties. And then we put all the phases together for the microstructures. Now it says one of the central questions that what are the base pairs for a phase? How many are they? Is it like 10 to the fifth orders? So if you have 20,000 phases, then we have 3 billion of pairs. So that's actually a fundamental question, right? If you can really grasp this, then can start really designing, right? Can design. Of course, let's see how the human genome design stuff, right? That's called gene therapy. Gene therapy. Okay. So it's modify or replace genes. So what does it mean? That means you get genes is bad, some bad genes or some deteriorated genes, you can replace them. So how do that? At the moment, most of the time is that you do something outside, you put the good genes inside, you use virus, carry it, and put it in the body. Yeah. But I think, it could be another way, right? Why don't we can just, because remember the genes is the chemical pairs. If you can change, you can switch the pairs, right? You can switch some genes to activate or not activate. So you can do in vivo, okay? That's actually one of very, very interesting project one of my colleagues at Penn State in biology is doing or has been doing. he left the Penn State last year, is that our nervous system is controlled by neurons. However, when we become old or get some accident, our neurons are dead. And it's very difficult to regrow the neurons when we become old. So the question is that, what do you do? So what nature does is that when when the neuron is dead, it tries to encapsulate it. So it tries to isolate it, so it's going to become dead, no function anymore. So the most research approach is that, can we just kill those bad things, right? Okay, so try to, but the problem is that you kill the bad things, but you can never get the neurons back. So you need to really regenerate the neurons. So his approach, Professor Chen's approach, is reprogramming, because we can change the gene, right, internally by virus. So the idea is that you can reprogram it. That's really his approach, reprogram the genes. And it has done for the last 10 years, and fantastic approaches. He's got a private company. I tried to commercialize the technology too. So maybe this will be our next 10 years, right? Remember, DNA is a polymer. Neuron is also a material. Okay? But how you can mix material for the better use. So I put this slide here. I claim that material genome is basically the human genome concept plus CALPHAD. The CALPHAD gives the data. Human genome gives the framework. So of course, we talk about the temperature and the composition, but actually there are more than that. We can do strain, we can do electric and do magnetic contributions. In that case, we can make the free energy function in addition to temperature and the composition. We can get all these quantities into it. That's what we control from outside. And of course, sometimes we control different variables. That's when we make a different free energy function. So in this case, with a new free energy function, we control temperature, stress, electric field, and magnetic field, and the mass. And with this non-equilibrium state, entropy production. Okay. In this case, now we can think about this one, right? We cannot use this one to derive all kinds of properties. For example, we know that the derivative of phi to t give us s, right? So phi to sigma give us epsilon. Okay. So this is the first derivative. And then we can make another derivative, okay? Entropy to temperature, that would be our heat capacity. So all these derivatives, as I mentioned before, give all the properties we need. Okay, we also realize that the red and the blue ones are conjugated variables. One set are called potential, which most time we control it, and the molar quantities, which will be they come together as one term in the combined law. So this one gives us the derivative, as I mentioned one. So the derivative of energy to the first row give us the first column. The first derivative gives us the second derivative in the middle. It's all the physical properties: heat capacity, thermal expansion, and the elastic constant, the permittivity, permeability, and the piezoelectricity, and the electrocaloric effect. It's all derivatives of the energy. Okay. So that means as soon as we get this kind of function, we can predict all kinds of properties. For example, we are working on this one. You think about the electron transport and temperature gradient, that's some electricity. So a lot of properties we can use. Okay, so we need data, right? We need data. So data generation, we need to generate data. We need to process the data. We need to use the data. So generation of data, of course, mostly come from the experiment. The experiment takes a long time, and weeks to months, and also is very close to equilibrium. Okay? And also when you measure it, you combine all the factors, all the contributions into your data. And the second approach is the quantum mechanical calculations, called DFT-based first principle calculations. They can do stable, metastable. Well, we are also trying to do unstable. The time is much shorter. Time is much shorter, for days to weeks. Okay, you can do individual contributions. Okay, you can talk about the different contributions. Okay, and talk about different configurations, lattice, atomic, and spin configurations. The more recent one, as we know, is machine learning, right? You can train the machine, develop models, then use DFT data or experiment data. And well, the model itself takes time, days to weeks. But however, as soon as you get the model, the calculation itself takes seconds to hours. It's very, very fast. Okay, after we get the data, we need to do the processing. We need to develop the models and the model parameters. Okay. As in all the data we have, we can have the uncertainty. So we need to be able to quantify the uncertainties. Uncertainty that involves the models, model parameters, and the model predictions. After we got the data, we can do the material design. Okay, that's our way to go. We want to design better materials, and so the materials from design to application will be shortened, time-wise. Okay, this is a paper I wrote about 10 years ago. I talk about the integration of first principle calculation and the CALPHAD modeling. And typically, before the first principle calculations, the modeling are done from experiment data or some estimations. But when first principle comes in, and now we can do the calculations, it's quantum mechanics, and most of the time at 0 Kelvin. Okay, as first principle calculations was the density functional theory, which developed in 1950s, 60s. And we can take the statistics to finite temperature, combine together. Now you can see that we have experiment data, we have first principle data. With statistical mechanics, we have much better models, right? And then we can have better prediction. Then can do better material design. And now, of course, you have machine learning too as another dimension, which adds to that chart I just had. Now, to do this, we needed tools. We needed better tools all the time. We needed high throughput, we want to uncertain quantifications. So my group has been working on this in the last, 10 years or so. And we have a set of tools on the GitHub, which is open source, Python code. We have data generation. Our machine learning code is not on the GitHub yet, but we do have a place, a website you can download the tool. And the DFTK, that's for the first principle calculations for high throughput. And the data processing, we have PyCalPHAD, we do the models and the calculations. And SBA is for the database development. And we have the uncertainty quantification, which is the program was made by scientists at the Oregon National Lab based on the PyCalPHAD and SBA. And they're all open source. Okay, so you can use it and download it and change it, and also add more functionalities to the code. And we also have a YouTube for tutorials. You can go read them. And we actually today and tomorrow and this month we're running workshop online for people to take the courses, to use the tools. And I want to go one slide about machine learning. Machine learning is very important for the models, right? Models has one important issue is overfitting. Okay, for example, is this one you have the maximum average error is 28 MeV for the formation energy, and it's better than this one, right? This is 40. However, as we will see that it shows that, right? So you have better fitting with this 9 compared to a 20. However, when we do the prediction, we found that the new materials, we found that this 20 does better. Yeah, so that's very important. Sometimes we have to balance the best fitting and to the best extrapolation. So we call it transfer learning. So for example, we want to use the model to predict how many new calculations we need to do to make sure our predictions are good. For this case, it's for sigma phase. We did the training. We found that if you have 10 data points, would it be very good enough? We don't need 100 points. 100 data points, we're not changing that error bar much more. Okay. So 10 data points would be enough. And for the DFT-TK, that's the high throughput DFT calculation tools we have. Okay, so this tool we have built on the data and the tools in the community. These are the tools used for materials project for the first principle calculations, most for 0 Kelvin. So we build on top of that one, do the stable, metastable, composition, temperature dependent, and even for unstable states too. And for PyCalPHAD, it's published in 2017, the paper. It uses advanced sampling algorithms, and they use very important symbolic computing. So you can take the models, so the user can build their own models. And they also can calculate non-equilibrium state. And of course, the equilibrium calculation. And this was developed by one of my former students, Richard Otis. He's not a JPL. And after he joined the JPL, he continued to develop it. And also he put this code into the software competition at NASA. And in 2019, it won the prize at JPL, and then went to the national competition and won the second place. That's just fantastic, and shows the impact and the potential impact of CALPHAD from the programming point of view and the impact of the application. And SBA, we also developed quite a few years now. It is high throughput modeling with 2 steps. The first step is the parameter evaluation, and it takes the derivatives of the energy function and evaluate the parameters. And then refine the parameters using phase boundary data, use the machine learning approach to refine the parameters. And then can do the uncertainty quantification because of that process. Now you can see that I mentioned about the data generation, right? We have the theoretical prediction with machine learning, the DFT and the calculations and also mechanical property. And also experiments, of course, that's very, very important because experiments is the ultimate check of all the data we have. And I'll put all the data together, we found the total data. That's the original data for these materials. However, we need to use this data. We need to create a database, okay? That's called a processing data with Pachifat aspect to do that. And after you get database, like Greg also mentioned, you can do material design and the materials manufacturing and material service. And those manufacturing and service will generate new data too. And then the new data get into the total database and then refine the database that we have. And when a material reaches its lifetime, and you get a material cycle, you get new data too. Okay, so we want to capture this data too to do the processing, continuously improve the database. As you can see that this data ecosystem continuous collect the total data and continues develop the database, and it continues to improve the material along the way. So we call this process a data ecosystem, and to make it more analog to the ecosystem, we develop this concept called ocean of data. So all the individual databases is online or private or bigger or small. We should be connected them through channels in the ocean of data, then process them, generate new information. So that's the model parameters. And then the model and the model parameters will be used to predict, kind of precipitate, get new products, new understanding, new design of materials, and they feed it into the different materials data, and also to the private companies, and they generate new products. And generate new data, then this is a cycle process. So because it's data ecosystem. Of course, with this database, we can do a lot of applications, and I will not be able to go through all of them, but they are all, most of them are mentioned in my overview paper I mentioned at the beginning. And it's wide applications. The only thing I have not worked on are polymers. Maybe I will start work on polymers down the road. I did a work on metals and oxides and ceramics, and a wide range of materials. And I want to mention one is additive manufacturing. We know that it's very popular, and many people are doing additive manufacturing now. And we are working on one of the area is called functional graded materials. That means you want to have different materials to different things and put them together through additive manufacturing. Previously, what we do is that we weld them together, right? We somehow put them together through welding, brazing, or just a physical bonding. So in this case, for example, one example here is a JPL example, is that have steel in the middle and IMA outside. IMA has very small, very low thermal expansion, and steel has has high strength, right? So you have the strength and the physical property, put them together. So as you can see, we started working on this one in 2014, published 2014, and actually JPL started even way before that, and we have a lot of papers published since that. And now this process is important. It's not steel, it's not a IMA. In between, it's between. So both of them and in between. So we know that when you put a different material together, you may form the detriment phases. So how can you avoid that? Right? So now you look at the phase diagram. Okay. So it's complex. It's complex. It's multi-dimensional space. So computational approach can really help. And I have a lot of additional slides here, but I will not have time to go through. But I do want to just quickly scan them, a few examples. This example is about the thin film deposition for magnesium diboride. we carried about 20 years ago. And this for the multiferroic materials thin film growth condition. And this for another, I think there's strontium ruthenium oxide, a growth condition for thin film and BE. And another very important concept is that we usually think the green boundaries are not stable. You want green growth, right? But you can control it. Actually, it's possible if you through green boundary segregation, the green boundary can become stable, thermodynamically stable, because the very stable nanogreens. Nanogreen basically means that you can have a lot of green boundaries. You can segregate the elements in this green boundary, so the green energy becomes zero. There's no driving force for green growth. We work with Army Research Lab on this project, and they did experiments. You can see that experiment at different temperature have different green size. There's 20 nanometer, okay? So you can actually make the nanomaterial stable at a pretty wide temperature range. And another important properties we use are the transporter properties, diffusivity, and all kinds of transporter properties. And through this kind of phenomenon, understanding of thermodynamics, you can see that kinetic properties basically go over the barrier. But this is only energy, all thermodynamics. If we can predict the barrier, then we can predict the kinetic properties. So that's what happened with diffusivity. We did diffusivity 2008. Before that, most of the diffusivities were calculated by molecular dynamics, kinetic process. But we can show that you can do it actually by thermodynamics, the energy. And this is the Seebeck coefficient as for some electric materials. And another one is for the Lorentz number, which is for transport for the conductivity, thermal conductivity, and electron conductivity, put them together. And the last one slide I want to show is about the sum expansion. Okay, this one shows this is linear sum expansion for this iron 3 platinum. It's actually see it become negative in a range, right? So volume shrink. Why is that? Well, it's actually completely understood by phase diagram, temperature pressure phase diagram, with isobar. This is the fixed pressure plot volume as function of temperature. You can see in some temperature range, the volume becomes smaller when temperature goes up. Well, that's actually complete the thermodynamics statistical mechanics for that one. All right, I will stop here. I want to thank you for your attention. And I hope you will find that thermodynamics has a broad range of applications, and the CALPHAD makes it possible. Thank you very much.